Hello, everyone. The purpose of today's session is to complete a demonstration and overview of the eMaint X5 system. Now, on your left-hand menu, you'll see that we have more than a few options we can start with. Anywhere from, on the top left menu, dashboards and reporting, so being able to track different trends and costs within your maintenance management system, even down to managing spare parts and purchasing. Or at the bottom here, even tying into work order management and managing any corrective work requests. Where I like to start out is the asset side of the system. An asset being anything that you're tracking a history of maintenance on. So your different sites, facilities, any equipment that's either going to have more corrective work orders or even tying into more of your preventive and condition-based maintenance. Now, eMaint is a very flexible system. One example of that is each list you see is user-specific. So each person can easily drag and drop different columns, resize them, add new ones, remove them, and really make this look the way you need it to. You can sort, you can filter in a few different ways, and we can even save frequently used filters. So different departments, different teams, different types of assets can all be under one roof. Now, we do have an Explorer view, and think of this like a table of contents into your data. And that's based off the way that you want your hierarchy set up. The way that I have mine goes by site, building, and then asset type. But again, you can pick from any field on the asset view, just based on your preference. So if I want to see assets within Bonita Springs and my main building and my facility assets, no problem. It'll drill down as we go. Now, a few different views here as well. So it's not just the Explorer view. We have our table view, where again, you can sort and filter. We can display these assets as cards. If you wanted a quick summary of your equipment, manufacturer, model, serial number, everything else. Or we do also have a tree view. Okay, now what this does is it displays all of your assets by a parent-child relationship. So you can see components, subcomponents, sub-subcomponents, and so on, all broken out. On your right-hand side, you'll see any ungrouped assets, which more than likely could either be a standalone asset that doesn't have any additional pieces, or it could be more geared towards, say, your mobile units that aren't fixed to one system, one location. Now, this isn't the only way to view the hierarchy. We do also have site-level permissions built into X5. So think of these as different folders or different subsets of data under one global eMaint database. Okay, now each user can be assigned to either an individual site, like you'll see here on the right side, I'm signed into my default site. You could also be assigned to a group where you could actually see data across all of the sites underneath that grouping. Or up at the top, we have all, which is more of a global view of all different sites and assets. So really, the benefit is that whenever you have a user and they're assigned to a certain location or grouping, they can only see those relevant assets, those work orders, those contacts, keeping them focused on whatever they need to work on. All right, so let's dive into one of the asset detail views. Okay, the asset detail view is where you store your important dates, costs, manufacturer, model, serial number, anything relevant to that piece of equipment. Now, these fields that you see are usually built based off of whatever data you have today during implementation. However, if you want to have more fields or if you want to take some away, we give you the option to manage these forms as well. So built in the back end here, you can create new fields, you can modify existing fields, even change around the way that your fields are displayed. You can have multiple different forms per table. So think of it this way. One form could be more geared towards your facility assets. So location, room, zone, floor, that type of data. Whereas maybe something that's one of your fleet, mobile unit, manufacturer, so make, model, VIN, driver information could be included on a different form. All right. Now back on that asset. On the right-hand side here is where we have our related entities. Now this is where you can store things like asset meters that could be geared more towards, say, runtime, so hours, cycles, units produced for preventive maintenance. Or this could also be tied into condition-based ratings as well. Too hot, too cold, too much vibration. This is where it will trigger a work order off of exceptions. And this is where you say what meters are being monitored. We can also store any related parts. So here are the parts that are needed to service this asset. It can show you how many parts are needed from what location. We can store any documents, manuals, checklists, any expiration dates. And also, you can have a full audit trail of any change that's been made to this asset record. So if an update is made, you can see who made the change, when was it saved, old values, new values. So you have full transparency on anyone who's modifying these records. Now, it's not just related entities. We can also store reports. And the reports can be things like a year-over-year cost of that asset. So that encompasses any parts, purchases, time spent. So you can start to see, okay, are we spending more time on this asset? Are we spending more money on this? Is it time to repair again, or is it time to replace? You can see a whole list of all of the work orders that have been associated with this asset. So who performed the maintenance, when was it completed, and again, a roll-up of those different costs. And we can also see any scheduled work orders, so any maintenance that's going to come due. So the gears in the background that will say, okay, this monthly, this weekly, this daily inspection, this preventive maintenance, filter changes, for example. This will automatically generate work orders once that maintenance is due. If the reports on the right side are not exactly what you're looking for, we can also include statistics up at the top here, where this is really just a quick summary of different data that you want to see. In this case, I show any open work orders for this asset. Could include a roll-up to costs, so time spent, any materials. And these are things that you can modify, all based on the form that we talked about earlier. All right. Now, all assets get their own scheduled activities or scheduled work. Now, when we create scheduled work, we have three different types. We have external triggers. We have inspection rounds. Inspection rounds are more like multi-asset work orders. So if you're checking out 100 different assets within the facility, that's one work order for all 100, as opposed to 100 work orders for 100 assets. And then you have your standard preventive maintenance. Now, the preventive maintenance is, think of it like a template. What's the work going to look like when it generates? First off, you can set the trigger. In this case, it's a monthly inspection. But it could also be meter-based as well. So whatever the meters are for that piece of equipment, if it's hours, it'll trigger off of that if it comes due early. We can also include any other data we'd like with this. So what type of work? It's preventive. We've included a brief description as well as some details down here at the bottom. We can also include any parts that will be required. So how many, from what location. And that way we can plan ahead. Maybe you get a list of reports that'll say, here are all of the parts that we'll need for preventive maintenance next week. Maybe create some kits. Now, we can also include procedures. So a step-by-step guide of what needs to be performed and in what order. Great for new hires, compliance, audits, inspections. And I'll show you how these become a little more interactive on the next screen. Okay, but again, just keep in mind that this preventive maintenance is a template, so you can pick and choose, again, what data, what information you want to have included here, and that will send out to the team member assigned to this work once it's ready. So let's actually go into a work order here. Now, I generated that preventive maintenance a little earlier today. Now, you'll notice it carries over all of the same information. So what type of work are we doing here? The description of work, even the details at the bottom. Just like the asset, all fields on here are configurable, so you can pick and choose what data is displayed on this work order view. Now, over on the right side here, we can see any of our parts requirements. So here are the parts that will be required for the service. We can include different procedures and different steps where you can include what passed, what failed. We can even say if something was completed or not. And the best part is that as you go through your procedures, it can actually say, hey, you can't close out the work order until every step is checked. Now, the charges area of this section is where you can include what was actually used. Okay, now that could be something like I'm pulling a filter out of inventory. I'm pulling it from our main location, and it's carrying over the cost of those items directly to this job. So if I add this as a parts charge, that cost will now be applied to the service. I can also keep track of any time spent. Now I'll show you on our mobile device, you can sign on and sign off different work orders. Or I can just say, I worked at an ordinary rate. We're not at overtime just yet. I worked 2 hours. And from here, it applies $50 to the service as well. Now, once I hit save here, you'll notice that the cost of this is all updated. Parts charges, time has been spent or submit on here as well. The last step is the closeout. Now, the closeout screen is really like your receipt. So who completed the work? Maybe a supervisor signs off on it. I can include any comments as a supervisor. I can input any meter readings. Hey, maybe we change this around as we go. And down here at the bottom, I can include any downtime. Okay, this is great for reporting. As I mentioned earlier, any of these fields are configurable. So if you want to have something like a signature, any notes, great. This will close out that job. Now, this was more of our preventative side. So work that's being completed, scheduled ahead, plan for, here are the parts we need, and here's how much time. But we know that not all work is actually proactive. We know that some one-offs happen where you'll need a request for service. And that's where we created a request link. Now, this could be a link that's on your desktop, on phones, tablets. We also have a QR code as well that can be read, and it will say, hey, what do you want done for this piece of equipment? Save your team members on their phones just a little bit of time. Now, the way that this works is that this request form allows you to select which site you're at based on your permissions. We can actually change the languages as well that are built into the X5 account. But if I want to say, hey, there's an issue with this piece of equipment, this is a priority 1, so something that we need to address immediately, and also allow you the option to go through and select what asset. If I select this conveyor line, for example, this will attach that request to that asset's history. Down here at the bottom, we can even include things like, I guess the best way to say it is any images, any diagrams, things that a team member and technician would probably need to see on that service going forward. Now, once this has been saved, that sends directly into the system and allows for our team members to actually go through and respond to it. This isn't a work order just yet. If I go into my main account once again, and we go to our request list view, the request list view will have that new request sitting right here. If I'm a supervisor, I can review what's come in, any notes, here's the issue. If this is something that we need to resolve, I can approve this. If it's not something that we need to resolve, maybe it's duplicate, we can reject it. A rejection allows you the option to send a note back to that person why. So, hey, we'll complete this on Monday and get right back to you. However, if we do approve this, it creates a live work order in our account where we can assign it our own priority. Maybe it's not priority 1, it's priority 3. We can pull over some context, like other services that need to be performed for this asset. So like, hey, we're doing some preventative maintenance on this later on. Let's complete both of them at the same time. Just like that, everything else on here will be included, proceeded with, just like we do the preventative maintenance side of the system. All right. Now, one thing we haven't discussed so far, more of the assignment side of the system. And we haven't talked about how we align our work orders with who's actually going to be completing them. You can add assignments directly from the work order, or probably more likely would be the scheduler side of our system. Now, the scheduler is our calendar-based view, and this can be a daily, weekly, or monthly view, all based on your preference. On the right side, it will show any work orders that need to be performed, and these actually group by day that they're supposed to be scheduled for, or in my case, are overdue. On the left-hand menu, you can see all of our different contacts that are within the system. In this case, it shows everyone. And they have a certain amount of hours associated with their name. And the reason for that is when you look at this, they have a calendar assigned to them. If I work from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, great, it will show that as my work week. If I work different shifts, like if I work from 5 until 2 a.m., it'll take that information and allow me to schedule only during certain hours. Now, if I take this work order, this filter changed, and I drag this into Brian's name here, it automatically adds an hour to his time. Now, that's by default, but if there are hours associated with this already, it would actually span to that time frame. If I want to add an additional half hour to this service, no problem. It updates his hours accordingly. Two things to note. One, you'll notice that there are certain alarm icons here on the scheduling. If somebody is currently not available during that time frame, whether it's based on their calendar or say paid time off, you can select this and see the highlighted contacts have conflicts. To correct that issue, you can go back to the scheduler, drag it to a time frame that they're available, and that disappears. Two, you'll notice the work order that I drug onto the schedule here is grayed out. And that's because you really don't want 100 emails going out as you're clicking through and making adjustments to the schedule. It waits until you publish, and at that point, it makes that assignment final. One last thing to note is that in the top right corner, you'll notice that we have a color legend and that these work orders are different colors. We can actually set up filters where these colors will actually change color based on status. Okay, so corrective work orders, for example, are showing in darker teal. Scheduled activities like preventative maintenance are in that mint green, and then critical work orders show in red. We can also set it up so it changes color if something's overdue, or if we have an assignment that has been completed, maybe it shows in gray. So these things are all flexible. All right, so now let's talk about more of our mobile side of the system. So we've talked about the desktop so far and being able to submit requests as well as complete work on, again, the desktop. We also have an app. It is called Fluke Mobile. Fluke Mobile is an app for iOS, Android, Windows devices. And it allows you to actually, again, download this onto your phone, but also work in an online, offline setting. So you'll notice that right now I'm currently not connected. So it's actually going to sync all of my transactions and feed them into the top right corner so you can track them for threading. When I sign into Fluke Mobile, this is a list of everything that's assigned to me that's still open, right? And this is a configurable view as well, where I can sign on and sign off a work order. It will timestamp the second I start and the second I stop. I can include different fields down here at the bottom, like job status, failure codes, problem types, any comments. And we also have configurable buttons. So I can do things like book my time, materials, add any images. And those can actually pull from a side menu here of, again, asset history, creating work orders, spare parts, any context around that asset when I go out to perform maintenance on it. And the reason we structure it this way is that, again, we want you to be able to go on the go from one asset to the next without having to go back to the computer. And this is one way that we enable it, through adding in things like attachments, asset history, and so on. Now, the other side of the system as well is asset tracking. Right now, I won't go too in depth on this because the menu options are the same, but we do have a barcode and QR code scanner built into this app. And the idea here is that once you actually go and scan a piece of equipment or just search for it through typing, you can pull up that assets history of work orders, any attachments, but we try to streamline the process of getting there by being able to scan. All right. So from here, I'm going to touch on parts inventory before we get into dashboards and reporting. Now, parts are set up a lot like assets. Okay, every belt, bearing, filter, they all get their own profile. Okay, but the real difference between, again, assets and inventory is the inventory has their own on-hand values. So in this case, we have 17 currently on hand. And those can be broken out into different inventory locations. So multiple storerooms, stock rooms, different sites. And it looks like we have 3 in the main area, 11 in the critical spares, and 3 in the safety stock. Now, anytime a part gets moved, there has to be an adjustment associated with it. Now, this can be anywhere from a cycle count or physical count. Okay, you can say how many parts were there or how many weren't. Parts can also be updated via the charges table on the work order that I showed earlier. We also have the option where you can transfer parts between different locations. So if I wanted to actually send some parts from the main area to, say, the critical spares, I can select which batch it came from. I'll send one of these over to our safety stock area and type in any information for the transfer. Once I transfer, as you can see, those parts have moved. Now, anytime a part moves, it gets stamped onto the inventory journal. Okay, so this is the full history of every time parts have moved. So you can see how many parts moved, when they moved, what asset, what work order, what contact these are associated with. So you have full transparency around any parts movement and reporting. If a part is currently at its reorder point, you can actually see that on our parts reorder list, where it groups all parts. It'll show you by which supplier, and you can even process these directly into a purchase order. All right. So lastly, eMaint does have about 40 plus reports out of the box. Okay, and we actually have a great custom reporting engine as well. So as long as the data is getting into the system in one format or another, whether it's through mobile, through entering data on the desktop, or even more geared towards, say, like an integration, pulling data in from other systems, we can pull this out in a few different formats. The dashboard is really just a collection of different reports that you need to see on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Okay, so anywhere from a list of work orders that are currently overdue or need to be scheduled. You know, anything in red, which I have more than a few, are currently overdue. Yellow is something that's being worked on, and green are things that we've pulled proactively. We can gear this towards more of your manager's stats. So things like, are we becoming more proactive or reactive? You know, how are our work orders looking? We can gear our reports more towards inventory. So what parts are needed? What parts are needed for next week? What parts need to be reordered right now? Anything in dark orange needs to be reordered right now, and anything in slightly lighter orange allows us to see ones that are coming to their reorder points. We can gear this towards your standard reliability metrics. So your mean time between failures, mean time to repair, tracking downtime on your different units, even drilling into different failure codes. Now, this is just an example, but within the dashboard engine, you can take reports, you can select certain criteria, and it will filter your data for you on that dashboard. So whereas mine shows a pie chart, this could be a list of work orders that are associated with foreign material and short circuiting. Okay, but really it just depends on what you're being asked for. You know, is this something where you're looking for completion rates by department, by team, by type of asset? Is this geared more towards global comparisons? So between different sites and locations, what are our statistics looking like? These are all things that can be built into a dashboard. So you can either A, export on the go. So if you're going into a meeting, you can take a screenshot of this data, throw it onto your PowerPoint slides and head off to that presentation. Or we can also have these reports auto-generate and email out on a scheduled basis. So every day, every week, I could be looking at a list of work orders for next week or parts needed for work orders next week. Any work that's overdue currently that we need to focus on for the next day. Even down towards emailing out to procurement. Hey, here are parts that we need to pick up, and here's when we need them by. All right. So as of right now, we have covered assets, asset tracking. We touched on preventative maintenance, corrective requests that come into the system and how we assign them out. We touched on mobile and being able to log work orders on the go. From there, we touched on parts and then also having our reorder list for any parts that are currently understocked or at their reorder point. And lastly, we wrapped up on dashboards and reporting. There are more than a couple other areas that we could go into, but that is a quick overview of our eMaint X5 system. If there are any questions on what we've covered so far, please feel free to reach out to your eMaint representative. Thank you.